Hi, it's Brenda with Horse Healing here with another episode of Living Your Grit with Grace. And I've been thinking a lot about how sometimes we get stuck in old stories and live them, and they define us. I work with a lot of people, and that's really what we're doing, is we're shifting patterns and old stories that we've allowed to define us, or that have defined us and we didn't even know it. And have some freedom from it. And I do believe that the greatest predictor of past behavior, of future behavior, is past behavior. And that can be true unless we make a choice to make a change. So that does not have to be true. Our stories are a part of us. They help define us and shape us to who we are today. And that's stories of pain and grit and hard things, perhaps trauma. And it's stories of joy and bliss and beautiful things in our lives. And that is why I call it Grit with Grace. But when we get stuck in the grit, in the pain, life isn't fun. Life's not comfortable. We get stuck in those old stories, whether the old story happened to us when we were children or happened somewhere along our lives, or it happened yesterday. We can still get stuck in it. And sometimes we really don't even know we're stuck in it. So we might tell ourselves, consciously or unconsciously, that this is how it is. This is who I am. This is what happened to me, and that's why I'm this way, and I'll always be this way. Or that's how our family is, and that's what we do. And those are stories we tell ourselves. And are they comfortable? Is that what we want? What if there's a possibility of a vision of a different story in our lives? One that we choose. I believe that's possible. So we might hold stories that keep us stuck in painful, unhappy, difficult situations, and much more. Sometimes it's depression and anxiety. There's so much. Can come out in addictions or substance use or misuse, unhealthy relationships, holding back our truth, being silent. It can come from abuse and neglect and trauma and so much more. And sometimes we take on the role of others that came before us. Perhaps others that told us we were not good enough, not worthy enough, not smart enough, not skinny enough, whatever it was, that eroded away at our worthiness and our belief in ourselves, in our confidence. And as adults then, we sometimes, very often, take on the role of those who did that to us. And we do it to ourselves. So that self-critic takes over. But what if you could change that story? And you can. We can. I was stuck in an old story of codependency. I grew up in my life seeing quite a bit of it, having it modeled for me quite well. And I spent a lot of my adult life getting into relationships where I was codependent. They were unhealthy and toxic, a lot of them. A series of them. Yeah, I didn't even know I was in that story until it got so uncomfortable that I was so anxious, and life just wasn't working, and I was starting to have more self-awareness and more personal growth, and then I began to be embarrassed about living like that. And so that awareness became real uncomfortable for me. And that's when I realized that sometimes it was a paralyzing situation, literally paralyzing. And that's just not a fun place to be. So one day I said, I want out of this pattern. And I began to set about figuring that out. And it wasn't until I was in my training program with Touched by a Horse to get my equine gestalt coaching certification that I was able to drop that old story in the dirt right then and there. And do I sometimes still struggle with codependent ideology or wanting to help too much or get too involved in someone's story? Yes. But the rest of it, toxic relationships, are no longer in my life. Yeah. So we don't have to stay stuck in those old stories. We don't have to let them define us on who we are today. We can shift those old stories. So life happened to us and is a part of us, but it no longer has the charge. It no longer has the pull or the control over us that it did. So we can shift it to new stories of possibilities and joy and inspiration. We can release those limiting beliefs that we have to be that way because this happened to us. We don't. It takes a spark of belief that things can be different. To have a vision of possibility, a vision of a new story of your choosing, freedom from the chains of the old. Excuse me. That we can have self-worth, we can have self-esteem, we can stand up for ourselves, we can have healthy relationships, we can stop beating ourselves up, whatever that is. It takes that awareness. That's the first step. Where are you feeling it? What is robbing you of your joy and ease that you crave? What is sucking you dry? What would you change if you could? What old story are you holding that gets in your way, that no longer serves you? What do you need to believe in order to consider a new vision, a new story for yourself? The horses and I specialize in shifting those old stories of limitations and pain and lack to stories of joy and possibilities and inspiration. So to find out how to work with us and how we can support you in your journey from shifting those stories of flat out grit to stories of grit with grace, to stories of no I can't, to stories of yes I can, check out our website or give me a call. Have a blessed evening, and I will talk with you again tomorrow.